Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2088. The topic is Q&A, and the title is How to Address Excessive Hip Hinge in the Squat. Over half of my clients are personal trainers, which I absolutely love because I get a chance to help their clients by helping the trainer. So it makes me feel like I get to have a greater impact on the world. So it's very selfish, but I really like it. One of the trainers asked me recently for some advice with one of their clients. One of their clients had excessive hip hinge, meaning as they would squat, their torso would angle down towards the ground excessively. Like their chest would point towards the ground excessively, and kind of like before they would even get to parallel. So it seemed as though, like if you're familiar with an exercise called a good morning, which is anything but good in how it feels. It's good for in results. I personally don't use them much for many clients. However, I have used them for people in the past and myself in the past. So they might not be very common, but it's a good morning is an intentional. It is a goofy way of looking at it is like an RDL where your shins stay vertical. But instead of having a bar hang underneath you and you're holding onto it with your hands, the bar is resting on your upper back. And that can be incredibly challenging in a million different ways. But it's a great way to build cores, to build strength, build up your spinal erectors, build up your obliques, your rectus abdominis, the glutes, hamstring connectors, upper hamstring connectors at the hip. Really good exercise for all of that. But if the person is trying to do a regular squat, their regular squat should not look like, hey, good morning. And they would want to get down to parallel, considering this athlete, this client wants to do a powerlifting competition, and the standard of powerlifting is a parallel squat. So if you want to compete in that sport, then you got to do that. I work with people who do aesthetic competitions, bikini, wellness, figure physique, men's physique, classic physique, bodybuilding. And we don't always squat to parallel because sometimes for different mechanics and people's body types, it's not necessary to build the muscles that we want to build. But if you're competing in a sport that has that standard, you got to meet the standard if you want to compete. So she was saying that this client had trouble getting down to a parallel squat and they were excessively hinging at the hip. They asked what they could do. So I gave them a 6-step approach. I would basically, hey, address number 1. If it's good to go, there's no problem, then keep moving. If it's a problem, solve it, and then move on to number 2. So I gave them 6 steps. Step 1, if you're dealing with this issue yourself, is to address proper ankle mobility. One of the reasons why people will have an excessive hip hinge is they don't have enough ankle mobility, ankle range of motion. Therefore, their shins cannot angle forward enough to allow for proper mechanics everywhere else, everywhere above the ankle joint. So if they can't angle their shins forward, their shins are going to remain more vertical. Then in order to get the bar lower, the person excessively hinges at the hips and their chest points to the ground. If you can get more forward angle in their shins, that'll allow their torso to be more upright. Now, you don't want to have forward angle of the shin to the point where the heel lifts off the ground. So you want to work on ankle mobility so that way your heel can stay connected with the ground. Now, one of the links that I sent them was a video from YouTube. I'm going to be giving you some information you might want to write down. So if you have the possibility of doing that, you might want to do that. Or if you're listening on something that can give you an idea of timestamps, you can use that. But there's going to be some videos for you to check out if you would like to check them out. So to work on ankle mobility, I sent a band mobilization exercise from the YouTube channel Squat University. If you don't know them, damn sure should definitely subscribe. Really good information there. But really good mobility information as well as just general training and strength. It's Dr. Aaron Horshag. I don't know how to say his name. But he's a physical therapist, pretty smart dude. That's a very understated statement. But really good information. The YouTube video I sent is titled Banded Joint Mobilizations for Stiff Ankles. It's 7 years ago. It was posted 7 years ago, but it's damn good information. And there are definitely other things you can find on the internet that will give you more information and whatnot. But what I like to do is for trainers who already have a pretty good understanding of biomechanics, and I try to send videos that get the point across, but this one, for example, is only 43 seconds. I don't want to send her a 10-minute video on ankle anatomy and whatnot. She can deep dive into that if she wants, but if they're a trainer, I try to respect their time and send them shorter stuff that still gets the point across. So it's a 43-second video, shows the joint mobilization that you would use the band in order to open up range of motion. It kind of works on centering the joint using the band. Actually, you're not really centering it as much as you're trying to pry basically into a certain position that will coax the tissue around the joint to be more open and free, to allow more freedom of movement within the joint. So you don't want the joint to be jammed into one end or one part of the range of the socket. And I'm hee-hawing around a certain language because I don't want to get too nuancy. But essentially, you're trying to make sure that the joint is moving freely and in optimal movement patterns. And one of the ways to do that is what's called band dislocations, and there's other terminology for it as well. But you're essentially using a band to pull a bone within a socket into a more open position. You're then going to move through a range of motion to establish that as a healthy range of motion, renewed range of motion, loosen up tight tissues. And then when you remove the band, the joint is better centered. Those tight tissues are actually more balanced with the looser tissues. Not that they're loose, but balanced with the tension of the other tissues would be a better way of saying it. So that way everything around the joint is kind of equal. Okay, I think I got there with decent language. But that would be the first thing to do. You can also do calf stretches as part of their squat warm-up or as a mobility warm-up at the beginning of the workout. So sometimes I'll even have people do sled pulls, because that actually works as a calf stretch. If you're doing a sled push, you're on your toes and you're having to drive through the toes without your heel touching the ground. So that serves as a calf stretch as well. There's a bunch of other movements that you can use as kind of sneaky ways of getting calf stretches in, but it might help also to just push more blood flow to the joint, get more cardiovascular stimulus if that person needs it. There's a lot of sneaky ways to layer in elements such as a calf stretch. That's one of the easiest ones to do in about 1,000 different ways. So you don't actually have to do boring calf stretches. If you don't want to take the time to do that, you can blend it into other movements. But that's the first thing. So if you're excessive hip hinge in the squat, then you're going to want to focus on ankle mobility first. Then we want to ensure proper hip mobility. So I said the term like a distraction, like a band distraction, and this is actually where that comes up again. So for proper hip mobility, you want to work on mobilization and opening of the hip joint. And I was using the same kind of approach for this trainer. They can go basically from the ankle mobilization with the band setup to a hip mobilization with the exact same band setup. So it made it very quick and easy for them. Again, I try to be helpful and rather than annoying. So I sent a video that's on the YouTube channel, The Active Life. So shout out to all these people. But they have a video from 3 years ago titled Lateral Hip Banded Distraction. Excellent. The only thing I would say in that is they kind of a weak band. So I would put a stronger band on the person. But it's a 38-second drill video, and it shows them exactly how to do it. And then we also have another video that is going to work on internal external rotation. This one again is from Squat University, and it is titled Banded Joint Mobilization for the Hip, and it was 7 years ago as well. But again, it's only 59 seconds, and he actually uses the right strength of band there. But you can look at those things. There are other, like for example, Squat University has a video called 5-Minute Hip Mobility Routine that uses like banded distractions and whatnot, but it doesn't have the individual components separated to make sure that you're addressing each individual component. So that's why I did send these in individual videos. Once you would find what that person's individual issues may be, you would then create a routine around that. But it is important to isolate out each individual component so that way you can address and find what is the specific issue. So you can find routines that kind of put all this together, but sometimes they'll hide the true root cause. So you have to be very careful in making sure that you do initially isolate everything so you don't accidentally miss something when you're doing a big kind of compound routine that has multiple movements in it. So that's the first thing, was poor ankle mobility. The second thing is hip mobility. We want to be able to make sure that the person can internal and external rotate their hips. Often the reason why the person also excessively hinges is because they're not externally rotating their knees on the way down during the squat, which is necessary for the majority of people in order to rotate the thigh bone and all of its musculature. You want to rotate the thigh bone out as you're squatting down due to the shape of the hip socket. The hip socket, everybody has genetic differences in regards to width and genetic differences in regards to the angle of the hip socket. What this means is, if we think of our hip socket as a circle, okay? And out of the circle, the dead center of the circle, is a laser pointer coming out of the dead center of the circle. So if you're looking at a circle flat on a piece of paper, imagine that the laser pointer is pointing directly at you, okay? Now, people's hips are not set where their whole entire circle, like their hip socket, points 100% directly straight forward. Hip sockets angle outward a little bit. For some people, they angle out quite a bit. For some people, they angle out some bit. A little of a bit. What you would want to do is to find the external rotation of the thigh bone that matches the angle that person's hip is angled out. Again, for some people, that's going to be a small amount of external rotation. For others, that's going to be a really large amount of external rotation, so much so that they might need to have a wider stance. They might need to have a wide stance squat. Another person might need to have a narrow stance squat. Somebody else might be right in the middle. That's just human anatomy differences. If a person is not externally rotating their thighs outward and or they have too narrow of a stance, the thigh doesn't get out of the way and it hits the top of the available range of motion within the socket, the hip can no longer tilt forward. So then all of a sudden, okay, well crap, I can't go any lower to create depth. So I'm just going to hinge at my hips and my lower back and my torso, and I'm going to become my chest pointing down towards the ground in order to try to get the bar lower. Their body just thinks you're trying to get the bar down and up. So as they're lowering down, the thighs hit the top of the hip socket, but their brain says, crap, we got to get lower, then it'll just excessively hinge and tilt the chest down to the ground like a good morning. Whereas if they could externally rotate their knees more and or they had the proper stance width, then the thigh bones wouldn't have hit the top of the hip socket yet. Their hip can continue to rotate forward, it can continue to sink down in depth, and then they could actually get to parallel without excessive hinging. So you want to make sure that you have proper ankle mobility and hip mobility, because that is the foundation of the mechanics that allow for a proper squat regardless of a person's anatomy. The third thing I had them try, and what they're going to go to next, is what's called a front hold isometric squat. So you would hold something in front of you, weight plate, dumbbell, kettlebell, something. You're just kind of holding it at your chest, and you're going to squat up and down. What happens here is, and there's a little bit of mechanics to it, so you're going to do pauses and things, but the general premise of the movement is you squat up and down. What that's doing is by weighting the front of the torso. It brings the center of gravity of your body and this weight, as you're combining the two, to the front side of the torso. If you think of a bar on your back, the center of gravity of the bar is behind your chest. So therefore, you have to tilt forward to some degree. No one starts a squat unless they're doing high bar squatting. But even high bar squatting, people still have a slight forward tilt of their torso. Very, very, very rarely. It happens mostly in Chinese Olympic weightlifters. Their torso is going to be perfectly straight up and down when they squat. Most people are going to have a slight forward tilt, even in a high bar squat, in order to balance the center of gravity of the bar with the center of gravity of their upper body, which is the chest and the torso. Especially if somebody low bar squats, which is very common in powerlifting. If they low bar squat, which is going to shorten the lever arm from the hip to the bar, and it actually makes it easier to stabilize and brace your core against heavier weight loads on the bar. They'll low bar squat, you have a more forward angled torso at the start of the squat. What happens then is, if a person is already excessively hinging, you're putting them in a position that forces even more hinge as a requirement for the position. When you front load the body, if you do a front squat or you do a weight plate front hold squat like I'm having this person practice, in order to balance the center of gravity of the additional weight plus your body, you actually do the complete opposite. Rather than angling forward, you have to actually be more upright than you normally would. That then requires, in order for you to squat down nice and low, excessive and greater range of motion of the ankle and the hip than what you typically would use. So this is actually a way of challenging the ankle and the hip mobility that we just worked to establish and increase in the first two parameters, the first two steps. So now that we opened up that range of motion, we want to weight it and we want to use it. That's one of the reasons why people who stretch a lot aren't necessarily guaranteed to be very flexible. Because just because you stretched to open up a range of motion doesn't mean that range of motion is going to stay available. If the musculature of that range of motion is weak, that can be why it's tight. The body's protecting against using those muscles in those positions because those muscles are too weak to manage proper weight load in those positions. So it hides from those positions. If you take the work to open up the range of motion, to open up new positions, you then have to challenge the strength of the tissues in those positions in order to maintain usefulness of that range of motion. The body will only let you use the mobility, the range of motions that it feels is safe. The stronger you get, the more it feels is safe. Therefore, you have more flexibility, more mobility. So that is something to pay attention to, is when you stretch and you open up range of motion, you then have to weight and challenge. So weight as in W-E-I-G-H-T. You have to add weight to it and challenge the tissues in that newly established range of motion. So that's what we're doing with the front hold isometric squat. The YouTube video for that is going to be another shout out to Squat University. And again, it's because it's a 27-second video and it gets the point across. And it is titled, How to Perform a Goblet Squat Stretch. I change the terminology sometimes compared to what is used in videos, because goblet squat stretch has more interpretation to it than a front hold isometric squat. A front hold isometric squat is literally exactly that. Whereas if you told somebody, okay, I want you to do a goblet squat stretch, they're thinking of like stretching and like prying open a muscle. They might not know as much in regards to the positional components as what you would know for a front hold isometric squat. So the front hold isometric squat, you're basically going to hold something out in front of you. Again, weight plate, dumbbell, kettlebell. And it's moderate weight, maybe up to 25 pounds. Then what you're going to do is you're going to squat all the way down as low as your range of motion will allow. And then you're going to come up 2 inches and stop. And you're going to hold that for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. You're going to go back down 1 or 2 inches to the bottom of the squat, come back up 2 inches, pause, and hold that for 2, 3, 4, 5 count. So you're going to do a bunch of those little mini squats. So you're going all the way down, 2 inches up, pause, all the way down, 2 inches up, pause, all the way down, 2 inches up, pause. So you're doing little tiny pulsing squats all at the bottom. And that is prying open, pushing open even more range of motion in the ankles and hips, but it's doing it under weight load, which is going to help strengthen the tissues, which is going to help establish and maintain that newly opened range of motion. Then, the step number 4 is to practice goblet squats, goblet hold squats, where you're just going to go down normal full range of motion, up, down, up, down, up, down, and you're looking for a more upright torso, again, because you're front loaded in the torso rather than back loaded on the torso, but you're now, again, using the increased ankle mobility, the increased hip mobility under weight load, but you're now using full range of motion. You're kind of getting closer to what it would feel like to do a regular squat with that increased ankle and hip mobility. After you do a goblet hold variation, you do a couple sets of 10. You would then move to a high bar squat and practice it all together again. And then you would do a competition squat, whether that's high bar or low bar. So if it's low bar, you would then move to low bar in the 6th step. Now, do you do all these in one workout? It depends on the person. Some people, you might have to go through, do the proper ankle mobility, the hip mobility, and then they're really challenged and maximally fatigued by that front hold isometric squat. That's all you get through that day. Then you do some other leg accessories, you move on, but that might be the best they can achieve. Other people, you might be able to get all the way to step number 4, which is the goblet squat practice. Other people, you might go through the ankle mobility, hip mobility, front hold squat, the goblet squat practice. They might get right into high bar, and that's good for them. The other people, maybe you get through everything as your warm-up. Now, eventually, do you need to do the ankle mobility, distractions, and hip opening up, all that? No. Eventually, as you strengthen the tissues and you establish the new healthy range of motion, you would just do enough of these steps to just maintain it. So maybe instead of every single lower body workout, it's now once a week, it's then once every other week, it's then once a month. You just kind of do it as needed in order to be able to ensure that you can still move through those proper ranges of motion and have that better overall position in your squat. So that is an approach. There's many other, I'm sure, but this is an approach that is tried, true, does work, that will help address excessive hip hinge in the squat. So ensure proper ankle mobility, then ensure proper hip mobility, do front hold isometric squats, then a goblet squat practice, then high bar squat practice, and then go ahead and do your competition squats or whatever your normal training squat might be for whatever your goals are. Awesome. So I thought that was fun to share. I love answering questions for personal trainers. So if anybody else has any questions, you don't even have to be a client of mine. I just enjoy doing this. That's what the podcast is for. Doing 2,088 of these things. I just enjoy them. So if you have any questions, if you need anything, if you want anything, just reach out. You can go to our website. On the website, we have a Contact Us page. I just added that, so let me make sure that's actually the term. Yeah, contact us. The reason why was we had a contact form on the bottom of the homepage, but people didn't always know that. So I had people asking me, like, how do I reach out? So I was like, oh, okay, well, I got to make that easier. So I just made a simple contact us page. That is now on the website. So you can just go to the website, click on contact us, and shoot me a message if you need anything, if you have any questions, anything you want to hear addressed or answered in a podcast. If you do like our podcast, please share it. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. This is actually really important that we share the podcast because it does help the podcast grow, helps reach more people, helps help more people, and that's the whole point of it, is just to get the biggest reach we can, help the most people we can, get as many people involved as can. I just want to be able to answer people's questions and help the world as much as I can, given whatever time and knowledge I have available. And then if you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And if you do like the information we share in the podcast, we do share other information on Instagram and YouTube. So you can always find us, and if you do find us on those, follow us. So that helps build those channels as well. They're both under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.